Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and welcome to episode 32 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast with me, Rory Lees-Oakes, and with me in the phenomenal field as it's experienced, Mr. Ken Kelly. How are you, Ken?
I'm very good. Oh, frog in the throat, as I said, that I'm very good. But I am very good. And you know what? There's no secret that we actually do record these before that. We don't do them as they go out live. And I'm just going to share with you that this is actually the first recording that Rory and I are doing in January, although I know you're listening to it in the last week of January. So we've just come through the festive season. So I'm well rested and feeling particularly good. And how does today find you phenomenologically? I've
been reading lots of 19 propositions recently, and I found myself that the phenomenal field is working just fine for me, Ken. Yeah.
Well, phenomenology is great because it's about how we as individuals interact with the world and how we perceive that, and how we can perceive today's episode. See that link, Rory? Man, the guy's on fire. We're going to be covering how counselling has changed over the years, and we're living in such an exciting time here in the UK. Things have changed. We've only recently had the change to the BACP ethical framework. We may be moving towards it being a regulated profession. Really, really interesting. So we're going to be debating that. Really interesting. Rory is going to be sharing something in theory with Rory today, which I certainly cannot pronounce without reading it. So I'm going to read it. It's Thematic Apperception test. Is that right?
That's right. It's the work of American psychologist Henry A. Murray and a lay psychoanalyst, Christiana D. Morgan. And it's really, really interesting. We don't usually talk about testing or personality testing in counselling, but it's really useful if you're a trainer. So if you're a trainer, you might get yourself the basis of a good lesson here. And also, if you're a student, it can be really, really useful to help clients develop edge of awareness material. Nice. If you've got a client who may be stuck, or a client who isn't really good at accessing their feelings and their process, this is really, really useful. And the whole point of it is, and as I'll explain, it can be adapted. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that and my own experience of it and how it changed my life when I undertook this as part of a training exercise on a residential many years ago.
Oh, I like it already. I'm looking forward to that, Rory. And then we'll be ending today's episode 32, with looking at transitional objects. And it's really interesting. A transitional object is maybe an object that a client may entrust. The counsellor, may entrust to or give to the client, and it's really interesting. So we're going to get to that because I know that we had so much debate. It was the longest post I think we've ever had on our Facebook group, Rory, when we spoke about should clients. What do you do when a client gives you a gift? And as we were discussing this in our preamble. Now the counsellor's giving the client something. So that is definitely something you do not want to miss. And I guess, in a way, it kind of leads us full circle back to where we started, which is where counselling has come from, how it looks today, and maybe even where that's going in the future, Rory.
Absolutely. And I'd like to thank Glenys Arthur, who's a fellow tutor. She's based in Merseyside. She's a regular contributor, one of our regular contributing tutors to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. And if you want to the Counselling Tutor Facebook page, and if you want to join the Counselling Tutor Facebook page, you can do it in two ways. You can go into Facebook and type in Counselling Tutor. It's a closed group. If you just knock on the door, we'll let you in. Everyone's welcome. Alternatively, you can go to www.counsellingtutor.com. There's two L's in counselling. We spell it the English way. And you can go there, and on the top right-hand side of the website, it says Facebook. Click on that and click to be added, and we'll add you in. So, yes, so Glenys Arthur asked the question within the Facebook group, how has counselling changed in the last 10 years? And wow, Ken, has it changed?
Yeah. And, just with what you've said there, and you're speaking about that Facebook group, and I know it's a really supportive community of people that hang out there. We've got over 4,000 members. I mean, I'm just trying to picture 4,000 counselling students and tutors gathered together in a room, what that looks like. There's a lot of knowledge and a lot of different ways of perceiving things. It goes back to that phenomenology, doesn't it? How we all perceive things. And, that in itself is a way that counselling has changed, because it was very, I guess, isolated. If we go back before the time of social media, if you wanted to hang out and get opinions and feedback from other counsellors or tutors or people in training, it would be a little more challenging. But we've now got the technology. So I guess technology is one way in which counselling has changed.
It's true. When I did my first group in 1999, when I first started training, I was the only person in my group with a mobile phone, and it wasn't mine. It belonged to the company I worked for because they were so expensive. And I was the only person with an email address. And people would say, "What is this internet about?"
Yeah.
Or sometimes they call it the information superhighway, because that's what the internet was called before it was called the internet. So we've got a lot to be grateful to the internet for. And one of the things that's changed over the last 10 years is client narratives. We now see more of clients presenting issues played across the media. We've had recently here in the UK, we've had the scandal about abuse in football clubs. That's been played out. Every day in newspapers, there's more being talked about mental health. There's more knowledge. When I first started, Ken, it was a book and a handout, and that was it, or a little bit on the internet, and it would take you ages. It was a dial-up connection. It'd take you about half an hour to load a picture. So the internet has changed how we can get information, and there's a lot of good stuff out there, but of course there's a lot of kind of rubbish.
I guess it's about knowing where to go to, the correct source, Rory. Yes. And of course, counsellingtutor.com. Yeah, it's a great. There you go. We're plugging our own site as we go here. And I'm looking at, we've got that technology and the changes that have happened in counselling, and certainly in maybe how clients may present, like you're saying, that there is more access to information. So maybe things that people would have kept secret before, like you're referring now to the sexual abuse in football, which has been a recent story in the United Kingdom. And then breaking that story brought a whole pile of people forward. They felt empowered to be able to go, you know what, I'm not going to keep this secret. I am going to talk about this now. And we're moving more and more in that direction. And what I find really interesting is just a few short months ago, in 2016 here in the United Kingdom, the British Association of Counselling and Psychotherapy changed the ethical framework to which we work. And I think that is a part of the sign of the times changing. And I know that a lot of new additions were made to that. One is regarding working internationally, working online, because counselling is going online. Of course, we've covered that as well. But it really does feel like an interesting change. But does the human condition, this is me now kind of getting back to the root of it, does the human condition and the pain that a client brings in, is that not really just the same as it always was?
I think that's an interesting point, Ken, but I do think that the more people see their own experience in testimonies by clients, by talking about it, the more it normalizes their own feelings. They don't feel as isolated. And I was talking to someone the other day whose phone had rung off the hook after this football scandal had broken. And if you're listening, if you're not listening if you're listening outside the UK, there's been a huge scandal that's developed when a reasonably famous footballer shared that he'd been abused by a coach here in the UK, and all of a sudden, lots of other footballers and people who were footballers have come forward and said it happened to me as well, and it's becoming into awareness, and I think that human pain's the same, but I wonder if people, when seeing other people saying this is what's happened to me, it gives permission for people to seek therapy, which before the internet they may have felt really isolated. So I don't think the pain goes away. I don't think the pain's unique, but I think this is something about the fact that one of the biggest changes is people seek therapy now. It's considered
definitely.
It's considered not strange or weird. It's considered I need help and I'm going to see a therapist.
I think that is massive. What you've just hit on there is that the stigma maybe for going into therapy, where it was maybe thought of as, oh, you are weak, at the weakest of weak because you're basically admitting you can't cope with this yourself, is now actually considered a strength, and it is encouraged and it is applauded. And I'm so very grateful of that. I really am. And I guess, another question that comes up for me, and again, this is not right or wrong here. Rory and I are not telling you how it is or how it should be. We're debating this, and we really strongly encourage you to debate this with your peers. Go on our Facebook group and get a good chat going on this. The question I have is it then right that we should stick to the older modalities? Because there's been so much research, there's been so much change, and I heard a stat banged about the other day, and I don't know the validity of this, so I'm not going to put it over as a fact. It was just a stat I heard where they said, when MTV came out, the attention span of the population went down, because when you watched MTV, which was music television, some good many decades back now, and the people were called the MTV generation, there was something different on the screen every 30 seconds. So the average attention span went down. We could only pay attention for 30 seconds. And I heard recently that it's now down to 9 seconds. This was on a program here in the UK where they had some scientists talking. So it must be based in something. And they say this because of mobile phones, and you have new information and something new to engage you every 9 seconds. And they said that a goldfish has a longer attention span than 9 seconds. Anyway, in jest, I mentioned that, but just putting it in, if we go back to, let's say, the person-centered modality of therapy, and I'm very much rooted in that, it comes from way back, Rory, and there's been a lot in science, in development, in realization that has come forward, yet we still look and say that those conditions are necessary and sufficient. Are they?
Well, I think that there's a whole new podcast in there,
yeah.
Ken. But what I would say is that there's been a lot of talk about plural counselling, and more postmodern ideas. And for those of you who think, what's postmodern is not drawing off anything of the past, but actually developing brand new ideas that don't have any connection. And certainly things like narrative therapy and solution-focused therapy are postmodern therapies because they don't draw off any of the past theories. But I think there's something in the human psyche that just wants to be heard. And I think that certainly in person-centered therapy, that is still a human condition now. I don't think that's ever going to change. And yes, but I think that one of the things that we're getting closer to now is the medical model and the social model. The medical model was the structure of the brain and psychiatric drugs. Social model was counselling. And they ran in parallel lines. And now I think they're getting quite close. And certainly in my practice, I use psychological education as a way of helping clients understand their processes. So, yeah, we do live in very interesting times. And I'll tell you one final thing, Ken, how counselling changed. When I started, it was a cottage industry. I actually went to college with someone who was counselling with no qualification, and she thought I need a qualification. And in those days, that was 14 years ago, that was quite the norm. People would say, I think I might, I've been counselling for years, but I think I might need a qualification. And she was a very good counsellor. I mean, I don't want to knock the person. She became a very close colleague, a very good, warm person. And she learnt a lot through the counselling course. So, yeah, it's become more of a profession, and we're more respected by other professionals than ever before.
Agreed.
So doctors, I've spoken with doctors, psychiatrists, and we're treated as fellow professionals, where in the past, I think there was a tendency for us to be seen a little bit as a cottage industry.
Agreed.
So that changed.
Agreed. And and to close this down, because we've got so much great stuff to bring in this episode, but, as we were debating that, I was deliberately throwing the cat in amongst the pigeons to get the pigeons flying around. But it is my honest opinion that being with another fellow human being and offering those conditions and really truly listening is more needed now than it ever has been as we move forward, because it's almost like society becomes more and more isolated the more technology we have and the more we build walls around us and the more our life demands of us. And I think, if you're a student right now and you're just about to embark, there's never been a better time. There really hasn't, and we really need good counsellors on that front line, because there's a lot of hurt out there and a lot of pain. And I think it's a privilege that we get to share that with clients. So, wow.
Thank goodness for you. Thank goodness for you who serve your communities. Brilliant.
100%. So, and what was interesting, Rory, as we debated that, was that we recognised that there has been change. And part of that change, when you shared that you bring in psychological education into your counselling, because that parallel has become less and less, is that educating ourselves is becoming more and more important. CPD, continuing professional development, knowing what's going on. And on that note, Rory, you're going to educate me today, I know, for one. I'm sure many of our listeners, because this is a topic that I haven't heard of before. So I'm really excited to hear about it. It's a Thematic Apperception test.
Yes.
Is it? Tell us what we're going to get from this.
Okay, well, I first came across it as a student where I was, and I'm not going to give the game away in the preamble, but I first came across it as an exercise as a student on a residential, and it changed my life so much, Ken, that I within a few months left my job and embarked on a career in counselling.
Oh, you don't need to say any more than that. Without any further ado, let's dive in. I can't wait. It's Theory with Rory.
Counselling Theory with Rory Lees-Oakes.
Like most students who study counselling, during my certificate year, I attended a residential weekend. For 2 days, I attended workshops, practiced my skills, and got to know and better understand other members of the group through numerous skills sessions and the evening socialising. On the final day, the tutor spread out on the floor around 100 pictures, torn from magazines and Sunday supplements. The task was to pick a picture we were attracted to and build a story around it. After much consideration, I chose an image taken from a glossy fashion magazine. It was of a fashion model in a blue cocktail dress sat on a toilet which she was using as a seat. The image intrigued me, drew me in, and then her story started to unfold. She was a successful fashion model who earned lots of money. However, she felt empty, not real, and worst of all, those around her, the directors, photographers, makeup artists and lighting crews, only respected her for how she looked, not who she was. She had come to the end of the road and knew it. It was time to move on. She had locked herself in the bathroom to take time to reflect and make the decision to leave her old life behind. It felt very liberating, but very, very scary. With her story now complete, I found a partner and started to share. It did not take long for me to come to the conclusion that the story I developed said more about me than her. Those thoughts and feelings I had about the woman in the picture were my own pre-symbolised edge of awareness knowledge. Her story was in reality mine. A few months later, I left my job as a sales manager with a multinational company, and with no job to go to, I literally jumped into the unknown. A few years later, and now a qualified counsellor, I attended a CPD session on client assessment. We were split into 2 groups. My group, the assessors, stayed in the room, while the other group left for a few minutes outside. The tutor explained that we were going to assess the other group's readiness for therapy, and we were going to use a TAT assessment method. She pointed to the end of the room, where a table was covered in pictures. She went on to explain that members of the other group would be asked to take 3 pictures, and then we would pair up and help them explore the meaning of the pictures in a skills session. And just like the experience I had years before, the person I was working with not only drew a connection to themselves through all the 3 pictures, they also developed a further awareness in relation to unsolved grief. So what is this TAT test? Well, the Thematic Apperception test, known as TAT, is a projective psychological test. It allows individuals to help develop narratives around images that connect directly to their own experience. It was developed in the 1930s by the American psychologist Henry A. Murray and lay psychoanalyst Christiana D. Morgan at Harvard Clinic at Harvard University. The story goes that the test emerged from a question asked by one of Murray's students, Cecilia Roberts. She stated that her son was ill and had spent the day making up stories about images in magazines. She asked Murray if it may be used to explore the dynamics in personality. The test also has an interesting literary connection known as the Herman Melville Studies, named after the author of the famous book Moby Dick. The therapeutic technique was drawn from the Bloom chapter, in which multiple characters stare at a coin and develop a story from it. One character, Starbuck, who is a devout Christian, sees the Holy Trinity, while another character, Ahab, sees symbols of himself on the coin. Interestingly, this piece of plot writing allows the readers to get a deeper understanding of the character's backstory, sometimes referred to in literary circles as character development. After the Second World War, the test was adapted many times in differing approaches in psychotherapy. In 1970, the Human Potential movement, part of the humanistic school of psychology, encouraged practitioners to use it to help clients understand themselves better and stimulate personal growth. So the next time you see a picture in a magazine, make up a story about it. You never know what you might find out about yourself.
Thank you as always, Rory. So the abbreviation of that is TAT, isn't it? TAT.
Yeah, it's TAT. And in the UK,
I know.
TAT is something of rubbish and low value. It's TAT. Yeah. But actually, it's as you heard from my own experience, it was one of the most valuable pieces of work that I ever did, and it still resonates all the years on.
It does, and it's interesting how when we do these podcasts, and yes, of course, we plan them, but as we go along, it's amazing how we see things meshing together, because we started off talking about how we perceive life and the universe and everything as individuals, and the TAT test kind of keys into that, doesn't it? It's phenomenological. It's quite a mouthful, that word.
Deeply phenomenological,
yeah. So excellent stuff. Moving on to something really interesting. It's transitional objects. So can you kind of explain what they are, or what is a transitional object?
Yeah, well, I'll give you a bit of background to this. Many years ago, I was taught as a therapist, and we got talking about breaks. We just had a break for Christmas. And what happens if you get a client who is really frightened about not coming to therapy? And this can happen, where you're going to have a break. There's no debate about it, but you've got a client who's really, really struggling. And I think this is one, and I'll say this for experienced therapists, it's not something, I don't think, for students to experience or to use, unless, I guess, I don't want to be judgmental to students. Maybe it could work for you, but I think it needs a bit of thought. And basically, the therapist that taught me, Ali, she said, if you've got a client who is struggling and doesn't know how they're going to cope without you, you can give them something of your own that they can keep. It's what's called a transitional object. And, they can have that, and it reminds you of them. And that kind of keeps that bond, that intersubjective connection to you and them while you're not there. And of course, we have to be thoughtful of things like transference and dependency, all those things, which is why it has to be done with thought. But I've used it on a couple of occasions where clients have been very, very nervous about a break, and it's worked very well. She did go on to say, Ken, don't give them your car keys or a very expensive piece of jewelry, or they may never come back. It's said in jest. But yeah, a transitional object, a book. Ali gave one of her rings to a client. What do you think of this transitional objects? Because I know we've talked about it in the past, haven't we, Ken?
We have, and it's interesting. It brings up mixed feelings in me, if I'm honest, because we are there to empower the client, and I guess working with breaks. And of course, you can go back on our past episodes to listen to breaks. We have covered them in previous podcast episodes. But when we're looking at a break, we're hoping to put some kind of a support around that client for that break so that they are empowered to cope. But at the same time, I don't think that the transitional object, if it is understood correctly, does disempower. I think it can aid and it can help build. And if you go back to the theory that you shared, where you're basically getting a client to interpret a picture and to speak about it and how they will live themselves in there phenomenologically. There's a similar exercise that I certainly did with my students where I would bring in a box of inanimate objects. There'd be feathers and pens and measuring tapes and little dolls and all bits and pieces. And I did it towards the end of our time together. And I asked them to pick an object that meant something to them that they could explain the process of their journey with. And it was incredibly powerful what would come out of that. And I know with working with my supervisor that that same kind of principle has been used with clients, where they will pick an object and they will be able to speak almost about themselves using the object as a maybe a reference point or as a tool or as a fulcrum, I guess. And then I think to be able to say to a client, why don't you hold on to that during the time of our break? I think it could be really powerful, as long as it was based on them and their frame of reference, as opposed to, and I don't throw this in lightly to diss what we're talking about, as opposed to maybe the magic crystal that's going to get you through the difficult time, if you know what I mean.
Yes, we don't want to be going down the road of kind of giving people weird gifts,
trinkets,
yes. Yeah, that's the thing, or totems or that type of thing. But yeah, what you suggested is a brilliant idea. I used to do it with books. I'd give if a client had a book, or something like that, or something we may have used. A pen, I think, on one occasion that the clients, I worked with young people, a client had used to draw something, and they took the pen away with them, and that was quite a safe one, really, because no one would know that it was. That it belonged to me, and it was just a pen to anybody looking, but to the clients it was quite a significant connection to me. And yes, and as I said earlier in the preamble to this, it has to be done with a lot of thought and not something that's done as a first aid kit.
Yeah.
It has to be done with a lot of thought, and only I think certain clients could work with it. It really is about knowing your clients.
I like that, and I like that kind of leads back to the very first words that you said, that it's probably better suited to a more experienced therapist, and it's also probably better suited to a relationship that has maybe traveled some distance, where there is a certain understanding within the relationship, where you really know that client, because I guess it could have the opposite effect. If it was a new relationship and that trust wasn't built and the understanding wasn't built, the client could go away going, what is that about? So I think that I like what you've said there in kind of making sure those foundations are clearly in place. And we debate it only here, and we encourage you to debate it as well. Speak to your peers about it and get on the Facebook page. What do you guys think of transitional objects? Yes? No?
Yeah, let's have some debate going. And we'd love to hear your comments on it. And yeah, I would agree, Ken. It could only be effective as part of a co-created relationship where both parties are understanding of the terms of it. So, you may only get a few clients who are in that kind of co-creative space. So yeah, it's something to consider. Maybe talk about your training group, talk to your tutors, maybe speak with your supervisor if you're in practice. Definitely. And ask what your supervisor's views are on it.
It's idiosyncratic, isn't it? We spoke about idiosyncratic empathy, where empathy is different with each individual that you will interact with, and you will maybe be that different part of your dialogical self. It's your full self, but you may show a different side there, and it's the same with the transitional object. And it is, I think, maybe an area where controversy can easily be brought into this, and that's why it's a subject that should be debated. But I think we would be amiss, Rory, if we didn't bring it to the Counselling Tutor podcast, because it is part of what we do as therapists, and we should be talking about all of it. It's global.
Absolutely, and it's in literature. I think I read about that in my copy of Person-Centered Counselling in Action. I've got a couple. I've got a brand new one, and I've got the one that I hold dearly that I'd had for my student days. So it is something that's talked about in therapy. It's not something that's under the carpet, but as I say, it just needs to be thoughtfully done with the right client, with the right relationship, and for the right reasons.
And it leads us neatly back to where we started. We started off episode 32 speaking about how counselling has changed over the years. We had some really good insight into thematic apperception testing. Thank you for that, Rory. And of course, transitional objects. And we want to hear from you. Get on that Facebook page and tell us what you want to hear more about. We love combing through and looking for topics for our podcast. And we'd love to mention your name and your topic and speak about that. And we are so very, very grateful for all the feedback you send us, for the iTunes reviews. We have so many 5-star iTunes reviews, and that's thanks to you. And what happens when you make that review on iTunes is it kind of gives our podcast a little bit of a boost, and all that means is that it gets seen by more students just like you of counselling, of psychotherapy throughout the world, and it just spreads the word. So we are so grateful, because without you guys listening to this, it would just be you and I talking, Rory. Although it would be interesting, it would be less valuable.
Yeah, well, that brings us to the end of episode 32 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Thank you so much for being part of our group and taking interest in our Saturday morning ramblings. And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.